This morning, however, I'm going to spend most of my time talking about our recently completed Haiti mission. And at the end, I will tie it into a theme from the Parsha, which is actually a nice overlay into some of the themes I want to talk about this morning. So some of you here know more about the background than others, but I want to kind of lay the context. Adat Shalom launched its Haiti project in 2010, a few months after the earthquake. I was in Haiti on behalf of an Israeli organization called Tevel B'Tzedek, which does a lot of relief work around the world. Most of the work is actually in the Far East, Nepal, but they were funded to do some disaster relief in Haiti right after the earthquake. And I got a call from the director asking me to go down and do some work with the Israeli team there of an educational variety. And while I was down there, I got recruited to do some teaching and lecturing to some Haitians. And as it turned out, my translator was a young pastor whose name was Johnny Felix. We struck up a friendship. He started telling me his story, which I found quite amazing, that literally out of the rubble of the earthquake of Haiti in Léogâne, which is the epicenter where the earthquake happened, Pastor Johnny started a church and a school. And when I came back and started talking about that, I proposed that Adat Shalom adopt the school, which is called NICL. My French stinks, but it's Nouvel Institut Christian de Léogâne. Yeah, those are the words. It sounds better in a good accent, but you get the idea. So we just call it NICL. And ever since, our Haiti project has really taken off in a way that makes me extremely proud. I want to give a larger context about what's going on in Haiti, because among the questions that get raised is that all of us have read accounts about how the relief effort has gone in Haiti. And the answer is not so great, frankly. It's hard to get current numbers. The last solid numbers that put out by the UN said that in 2012, so these numbers are already 2 years old, there was $6 billion in aid that was pledged and committed to Haiti. At that point, only 43% of it was distributed. In other words, they couldn't find agencies that could make good use of the money, and of the 43% of the money that was allocated, a lot of it did not go to the purposes it was designed for. There's been a lot of reports about that, which is quite disturbing. The best guess estimate is that by the end of 2014, $13 billion in aid has been pledged, and probably the numbers comparable around 40 to 50% has been given. And again, of that money, how much of it is done good? It's a big question. I'll give you a small glimpse. How many people were here when Pastor Johnny visited us in March? Raise your hand. Oh, wow. Okay, so you remember the impact he made being here, and you saw why I was so taken by this young man's charisma, vision, courage, and determination. So apart from what many of you saw here on the Bima that Shabbat, we set up meetings for him on the Friday and Monday of his visit. And we met down at the State Department, USAID, several international NGOs that do work in Haiti. And it was so surprising. I remember one meeting in particular where a fairly high-level person at the State Department was eager to meet him. And I wasn't quite sure why he was so interested. It seemed to be like we had overshot the goal in terms of who was the right interlocutor person to meet with him. And what the guy said from the State Department, he says, you have to understand, the money that the U.S. has committed goes through about 4, 5, or 6 layers before it gets to end users in Haiti. And the reports that we get back, because anyone who gets the money needs to write a report, that's the government bureaucracy, we know that a very large percentage of the end users are not using the money legitimately. In fact, we heard a story which turned my head. This guy told us the story, that in Haiti, because the government passes through the money that comes from international donors, they pay per head for kids in a school. And so a fairly popular scam in Haiti is for people to make lists of names, and they say, here's the school I'm running. They get paid per head, only to find out later on there was no school, the kids' names were made up, and nobody verified it. It's hard to believe, but that's how a lot of the money gets wasted. So this guy in the State Department said, we're so excited to meet an end user who you can verify actually has a school, that actually teaches children, and is making good use of the money that he's not even getting. I mean, one of the reasons for the meeting was we wanted to put Pastor Johnny in the chain of some of the money going down there, which is yet to happen, but we're working on it. So that's gives you a sense of the challenge of helping a place like Haiti. I remember I had, on Friday night, we actually hosted a Shabbat service at our dormitory, which is a dormitory that's run by Notre Dame University. They have a nursing school in Leogan, and we always go during the Christmas week when they're off, so the dorm is vacated and we have the space to stay and live there fairly comfortably. It's a protected compound. So we invited a bunch of Haitians to our Kabbalat Shabbat service, which is quite remarkable, and dinner. And over dinner, I was having a long conversation with Pastor Johnny about the long-term sustainability of his school. And he made the comment to me, I have to say that if I was running a foundation and giving away large amounts of money, the best argument he made to me would not have cut mustard, okay? He essentially said, God sent me Adat Shalom. And I said, and what happens when Adat Shalom no longer supports your school? He says, God will send me something else, right? So it's not exactly the kind of plan for sustainability that, government agencies or foundations look for. But on the other hand, and in fact, I shouldn't say, okay, so I will say this anyway. Bill Halpern, we revised the flyer which you have in your Siddur, which is about pledging for our Haiti project. So I actually gave the quote to Marsha Teichman, who put together the flyer, and Bill and Marsha, who co-chair the committee, looked at the quote where I actually wrote the, said what I just said to you. Pastor Johnny told me that Adat Shalom was sent to him by God. So Bill Halpern says, I'm not sure that would go over so well at Adat Shalom. And I responded, I said, Bill, that's not the point. It is exactly what it's all about, because frankly, when you understand all the obstacles in Haiti, there is no way to move forward but for the classic leap of faith. And the people who are doing the most valuable work in Haiti are people of deep faith and commitment, without which it is impossible to take even one step forward. So understanding the theological leap between a Pastor Johnny in Haiti and a Reconstructionist congregation in suburban Maryland, I was quite insistent that the quote be left as it was relayed to me. I'll give you another quick story to show some of the challenges that Haiti faces. Turns out, and some of these numbers you'll find quite remarkable, only 50% of children in kindergarten through 6th grade are going to any school at all in Haiti. Less than 50% of children get any schooling. I'm not talking about high school. I'm not talking about college. I'm talking about elementary school. About half of the children of Haiti get education. Of that half, only about 10% are getting that education through what we would call public schools. Now, a public school system is one of the cornerstones of a functioning civil society, of course. And on every level, Haiti does not have a functioning civil society, and they barely have a functioning government. One embassy official said to us, who came and visited us for Shabbat, said without American aid, Haiti would essentially be a failed state. Simple as that. So here's a glimpse of the public school system. Only about 10% of that half are getting educated in public school systems, and they're the worst schools in Haiti because this government oftentimes does not pay the salaries of the teachers. So what happens is the teachers, after a month of no salary, a second month of no salary, they simply stop coming to school. So the schools are simply a building where kids sometimes come to hang out without any education happening, okay? The alternative, which is the better school system, are a variety of private schools, most of which are Christian-sponsored, as is the NICL. Okay. Now, they charge a tuition. The tuition at NICL, which has 170 children from K through 6th grade, there are 170 children. The tuition is $75. Very modest, and that is the tuition that funds the budget, and with that, there's not enough money for the budget. Our funding actually makes up the difference between money that comes in for tuition and the remainder. But here's another little glimmer of what it means to try and function in Haiti. Pastor Johnny tells me the following story, that 2 years ago, the government was trying to kind of like impress international donors with how progressive they were. So they said, understanding how few kids they were serving in their public schools, and wanting to make some contribution to the students who went to the private schools, said we, the government, will pay the tuition of all the children in 1st and 2nd grade in schools. So it was considered to be, well, that's a step in the right direction, okay? I guess, the form of tuition vouchers, because these are, of course, are private schools. So what does Pastor Johnny tell me? He says the government came up with a payment plan where they would pay 3 times a year. You know, beginning of the year, middle of the year, end of the year, okay? He says, now we're in December, right? When we were down there it was December, okay? He says, I received last year 1 out of the 3 payments for the entire year. This year I've gotten no payments, and because there was so much hoopla and publicity around the donation by the government, all the families with kids in 1st and 2nd grade said, we don't have to pay tuition anymore. So Pastor Johnny no longer gets the tuition from the kids in 1st and 2nd grade, and he's waiting for the check from the government, which is yet to come. They still owe him 2 checks from last school year. So that gives you some sense of the obstacles to create a functioning civil society and even a small school. So all that's a long way of saying why the only way you can function in that setting is to make a huge leap of faith, a huge leap of faith. And of course, our method is, as much as we can kind of despair over the failure of the relief plan and how the money is used or not used or poorly used, the fact of the matter is we have decided to take a microfinancing approach. We've identified one very small corner of a very troubled land, identified a leader who we feel fairly confident is the right leader, who's doing good things against all odds, and we are making a difference in that small corner of a country called Haiti. We now have at Adat Shalom over 100 households who have committed to be partners in our Haiti project, which means a commitment of making a $100 gift for 5 years. It's a modest gift, but it was very important that we do it over time because the problem's not going to disappear anytime soon. And we therefore transfer down to Haiti between $8,000 to $9,000 a year, and that money goes to Pastor Johnny to do 3 things. Number one, about 20% of the kids in the schools, of the 170 kids, do not pay any tuition at all. They can't afford it. Number 2, we use the money to buy equipment so we can equip the school with small things, including some computers. And finally, we're essentially underwriting the basic budget. Because even when you add up all the revenue, and one of the beautiful things that's happened over the past few years is that with great coaching from Bill Halpern, Pastor Johnny now does a pretty damn good budget. He could, you know, when we started this, he just couldn't even do that. But now there's a budget where we can see where the money's coming in, where it's going out, and we can kind of understand and track it, which is, you know, that itself is something that was not so common in the Haiti environment, but that's now happening. And that's how we're supporting the school. So now we've, in addition to the funding that we put down, as people know, of course, we've now had 3 service missions to Haiti. The last one just coming back this past Tuesday. And I will say that there are very few undertakings that I can think about in my own rabbit, in my entire career, that has been as fulfilling as the development of these service missions. If you haven't been on one of those missions, the best way to describe it is that if you've been to an Adat Shalom retreat, a week to 10 days in Haiti is essentially an Adat Shalom retreat on steroids. On every level, because you're living together under circumstances that are modest, to say the least. The work is hard. The bonding is very powerful because you're in a situation where you need each other. You learn to work as a team, and the need is right in front of you every day. It's immediate. It's clear that you're doing something really important, really remarkable, and you're helping the people who you face. And so in the course of that period of time, people just feel really wonderful about undertaking their own leap of faith. We did a little reading before. I was looking for you, Steve, actually. The reading before we did the Michamocha, there was a lovely reading that Kit read beautifully about all of us undertake things in life that are challenging. And if we can come through it well and safely, it's time to give blessing. And I think for everyone who comes down to Haiti, even for those who went down a second and or a third time, it is a big leap of faith to do this. It's not easy, but when you're there, you just feel that there's hardly a place on earth that you would rather be than trying to do that work. On this trip, 20 members of Adat Shalom came with me. It was made up of 7 young men, no young women this time, and the young men were ages 15 to 25 and 14 adults. We spent our days at 2 different sites. One was a place called Lambie Village, which is a village being developed by a ministry called Grace International, a fairly large ministry in Haiti. They have about 200-some churches in Haiti and do a lot of wonderful work with folks in need. And we were building a second village. In our first mission, we actually did the first couple of houses at Lambie Village 1. And we now kicked off, inaugurated, broke the ground with a prayer, by the way. We did a beautiful blessing on the first day down there to consecrate the ground and the groundbreaking for Lambie Village 2. And we actually laid the foundation for the first 2 houses. Now, to do a before and after, what was really there were so many highlights which I will not possibly be able to recount this morning. But one of the highlights was that we went 2 days after we started the groundbreaking at Lambie Village 2, we took a trip back to Lambie Village 1, where some of us were starting the first houses. And we saw the people who worked side by side with us on those houses, because the condition that Grace International sets is that if you want to get a house, you need to work with the missions to build the houses. And furthermore, on the second mission, when they were completing Lambie Village 1, a lot of the folks on our mission made out of plywood little miniature houses out of plywood like this, a little roof like that, and they wrote Shalom on it. And when we went to Lambie Village 1, we saw all these little Haitian mezuzot, so to speak, in the windows of the homes that we made 2 years ago, okay? So talk about making connections to the people who both worked side by side with us and took these amulets, these pieces of blessings for the home, and put it in their houses and their windows. The second site we were at was actually the NICL school. And one of the major accomplishments of this mission is that the Fuller Center on Housing, based in Atlanta, which runs global missions in about 60 countries around the world, they have in each country partner organizations with whom they work. They have vetted these organizations so they feel good about sending Americans down to work with these organizations. Now, Pastor Johnny is not one of those, what they call covenant partners. Grace International is. And the first couple of years, the first 2 missions we did most of our work during the week with Grace International, and on the weekends visited Pastor Johnny and the NICL school. This year, having done about 6 months of work ahead of time, we were able to convince our liaison project director for Grace International to allow us to split our team so we spend equal amounts of time at Pastor Johnny's compound and at Grace. So we didn't just have a Sunday morning worship experience at Pastor Johnny's, which we did, but we also worked during the week to do 2 things. And these were major steps forward. We broke ground on what will become a mess hall for the students at the NICL school. Understand that these 170 children, most of them come to school hungry. And addressing their nutrition food needs is part and parcel of creating a responsible educational program as well. They go hand in glove. We haven't fully figured out how to feed the kids, but the first step is to create a space where they can eat. And the second thing we did, also in connection with this whole same concept, is that we created and dedicated a vegetable garden in the compound where the school exists, which they invited us to name. And as the group, we talked about a few options, and we decided to name it Gan Hamazon, the garden of food plenty. Mazon is the word for food, but it also has the implication not just food is ochel, literally, but mazon means plentiful food, abundance, nutritious food, which is why the blessing for food is the birkat hamazon, the blessing for abundant food and nutrition and sustenance. So we actually dedicated the garden, and in a moment that I will not forget for my entire life, Fred Pinkney, is Fred here? Fred, who did a lot of the work planning the garden and thinking about what could be planted, actually did the dedication after the Sunday worship service. They had a full house. It was packed. The services were by invitation only, because we from Adat Shalom are so popular, they would have had 3 times as many people come to the service as there was space in the compound. So Pastor Johnny invited people to the worship service. It was totally packed, standing room only. Afterwards, we did about an hour of activities, the culmination of which was the dedication of the garden. And Fred dedicated the garden in Creole. He's been working in Creole for about 6 months. That's the language, the folk language of Haiti. He's been working on it for about 6 months. He gave the dedication speech in Creole, and Pastor Johnny translated it for us into English. It was quite a sight to behold. And among the things that happened was Pastor Johnny chose 2 children from each of the grades, K through 6, to then go with members of Adat Shalom to plant the first seeds in the garden. Just have the picture in your mind, okay? I taught one of the evenings, because every evening we spent time reflecting on our experiences and doing some Jewish study. So one night I shared the following story, which was inspired by this vision of Fred dedicating the Gan HaMazon. There's a teaching in the Talmud that says that if you're in the process of planting a tree, and someone comes and tells you that the Messiah has arrived, first finish planting the tree, and then go greet the Messiah. Now, in the rabbinic mind, there's not a more important moment than the coming of the Messiah. It suggests a whole change in the way the world will be, a world of peace, right? So important is the notion of planting seeds for the future to feed the children, that I thought that teaching was almost written for that moment, okay? That essentially was all, that the planting of the seeds was actually our making an investment in the future sustenance of the children who go through the school that we support at the NICL school. So I mentioned some of the highlights. I think I've already mentioned some of these things. The last thing I want to talk about actually is what I want to call a tzedakah spiral. A tzedakah spiral. You know, sometimes you hear the expression, you know, things are not going so well, I'm in a downward spiral. You know, one thing goes wrong, then another thing goes wrong, and we've all had those times or moments, right? But there's also something that is the reverse, which is an upward spiral. Where something good happens, and it plants a seed for something better to happen, and something better to happen, and something better to happen. And our undertaking this service mission as part of our larger Haiti project is a classic example of what I can only call a tzedakah spiral. It is just amazing. And I want to lay out what that tzedakah spiral looks like and what it's made up of and what it means. So first of all, separate from the money that we've been raising through the Haiti project, through Adat Shalom and the 100 families who are committing $100 a year, every participant in the Haiti mission put together a fundraising page on the Fuller Center website, not unlike if when you do a walk for cancer or brain cancer or whatever it's going to be, you can raise money from friends and family. And we said specifically not to raise money from Adat Shalom members because many Adat Shalom members are giving through the Haiti Fund. So it meant that our participants were going to reach out beyond Adat Shalom. So you may not even know about this, but the 8 households that made up the 21 travelers on this Haiti mission have already raised about $9,000, which has gone primarily to fund the building of this mess hall on the NICL campus, okay? We now have a budget estimate because our project director, whose name is Johnny June, put it together in 2 phases. We've already funded phase 1 of the mess hall, some of the work we've done. There's more to be done with people from Pastor Johnny's community, but we also have a budget for phase 2, and we've given ourselves to the end of January to raise the remainder of that money to fund phase 2, which will give Pastor Johnny an entire structure where he can do not only activities but also feed his children. So that's number 1. We brought down tons of supplies, and I just want to mention some of the people who made that possible. We brought down school supplies for Pastor Johnny, which not only could he not afford, but aren't even available in Haiti, and that effort was spearheaded by Gina Sherman. Is Gina here? Gina, stand up. Stand up, Gina. Gina, is her bat mitzvah is when, Gina? Gina, that wasn't a stand up. That was a, I could do that, okay? Stand up, Gina. When's your bat mitzvah? When's your bat mitzvah? February 20th. So as part of her bat mitzvah project, Gina did a campaign to raise school supplies, and we brought all those down. They're now in Pastor Johnny's possession to use at the school. We got tons of supplies, building supplies, hammers, goggles, work gloves, whatever else, donated by Frager's Hardware in Capitol Hill, and Pam Summers made that happen. So if you live in the district or even not, next time you have to make a purchase, drive the extra few miles to Frager's Hardware. They made a very generous contribution of building supplies. We brought down mosquito netting. We slept under mosquito nets because there's a danger in the developing world to contract malaria. So we slept in the netting, but then we contributed to Lambie Village, and that was all underwritten by a grant we got from a national organization called Repair the World, based in New York, which actually is there to encourage more Jewish groups to do service missions like the one that we undertook. We brought down a ton of sports equipment from an organization called Leveling the Playing Field. It was started by a young man who was a graduate of the Jewish Day School named Max Levitt. Some of you might know his dad, Mark Levitt, and Kay Klass, who are his parents. So Max has been raising, getting donated supplies of soccer balls, basketballs, baseballs, uniforms, which he gave to us, which we all brought down and gave to the folks at Lambie Village as well. 4 members of Adat Shalom who've chosen to remain anonymous really very much wanted to come on our mission. And they decided for a variety of reasons that it was not right for them, physically or otherwise. So they actually contributed money to make it possible for one young man to go down on our mission to pay for his fee. And I want to recognize Ari Rickman, who came this year for the 3rd time. Ari's been on every one of our missions and really plays an amazing role as, you know, he's the only guy on our team that can work as hard as the Haitians who work next to us. You have to see Ari on the work site. They nicknamed him the Bull. But he also became an important leader for the other young people, young men who came, as a role model for what it's like to kind of do the work seriously and to be an amazingly important contributor. And his trip was underwritten by 4 anonymous members of Adat Shalom, which made that possible. Thanks, Ari. Louis Tenenbaum, you can stand up, Louis. Are you wearing shorts or pants? I got to tell you, Lou, we got dressed very nicely to go to church, to Pastor John's church. And I sent out a note saying, you know, dress nicely, including long pants. And Louis said, really? And Louis wore long pants to church in Haiti, where it was really hot, not like it is here. Anyway, just goes to show what you can pull off when you're inspired. Long pants, right? But Louis, along with some of the young people, are actually going to spearhead a campaign to try and raise enough money to start a very modest lunch program at the NICL school to provide lunch twice a week. Now, that may not sound like a lot, and it's certainly not enough to feed children for a week. But among the things that Pastor Johnny said is that one way that he can get towards sustainability is that a school that provides any meals has a leg up over any other school in the area, because most of the families cannot feed their children. So if a school is going to provide a few meals, it just gives him that one edge that he might need, and that's an effort that's also underway right now. And the final example of this struck a spiral is that there's a young man who I met on my first trip, whose name is Woody St. Hilaire. He is probably the most promising young man in Pastor Johnny's community. When I met him, he was in his last year of high school, and had, no, he was mostly in 11th grade at that time, if I have the years right, give or take. He was in 11th grade, and he was hoping to go to college. He talked to me about college. I spent about 6 months trying to find a university here in the area that would take him in as a student. And I failed at that. There are a lot of reasons for that I won't go into right now, but it seemed to me that one way to assure his future was to allow him to do university work here in the States. It didn't work out. So he's then decided to go to university down in Port-au-Prince. He was able to get in. We actually bought him, out of the funds for the Haiti Fund, we bought him a laptop computer because he said he couldn't go to school without a laptop. He didn't own one, so we bought him a laptop. On our first day on the campus, he came to say thank you. I saw him again. I've met him each time on each visit. And he gave me a letter saying he now does not have enough money to get through college, and can we help him with tuition? So it's a dilemma because, frankly, the need is almost infinite down there, and how do you say yes to one and no to someone else? But we did come up with a plan, which I think we're like 90% of the way there, which I'll share with you, because it also goes to the issue of how do you help in a constructive way, not just giving in a way that is endless giving, but also helping a community become sustainable. We decided that we would privately, I invited families who would be willing to do this, if they'd be willing to underwrite the tuition, but on a condition that we give it to Woody as a loan and not as a gift. And the condition of the loan was that we had a meeting with him, with Pastor Johnny present, and with the 3 donor families, who I want to recognize, Steve Hellman, Steve Sharp and Darren Schoenzeit. Are they here yet or not? Maybe later. And Jonathan and Roberta Jacobson. Jonathan, stand up. Okay, so those 3 families agreed to underwrite the tuition. Now, just to put it into perspective, and not to take anything away from their generosity, it's not U.S. tuition, okay? It's not $50,000 a year. The tuition is about a little bit under $1,000 a year to go to this university in Port-au-Prince. But still, it's a unachievable sum for a young man coming out of the community of Leogon and Pastor Johnny's community. So we literally had a meeting in the room at the classroom at the NICL school in which I said to Woody, we will commit to loan you the money for the next 3 years of your schooling. He's in year 2 of a 4-year program, on the condition that within 5 years of your graduation, you pay that money back dollar for dollar as a donation to the NICL school. He was a little bit shell-shocked. Steve called it the Godfather moment. We're making him an offer he couldn't refuse. But there's no culture of philanthropy in Haiti. You have to understand, this is like, what does that mean? And his first response was, I'd be happy to volunteer in the school, as I do now, and can I do it that way? And I said, no. I said, people who come out of this community, you will be able to finish college only because of the work that Pastor Johnny has done to develop this community. And the only way this school will survive and other children will be able to follow in your footsteps is if people like you who will have an engineering degree with the ability to earn some income in Haiti can begin giving back to support the school from the community that you come from. And he said yes. And it's only one student, but it's an idea that we're trying to plant a seed about how we can do the most responsible kind of support for this community in Haiti. So I lay out this thing, and now you understand why I talk about it as a tzedakah spiral. The fact of the matter is, when you are face-to-face with overwhelming need, and you're with a community, in this case Adat Shalom, an Adat Shalom community, that has its own culture and ethos of it being a community of chesed, of giving, of tzedek, of justice, of shalom, of peace, which was the theme of the sermon I gave on Sunday morning at Pastor Johnny's. And you understand that opportunity as a group, people simply give from their heart. It's a giving that makes you feel more fulfilled. It's not like, it's not a difficulty to do it, okay? And you just feel that you're part of something much bigger than yourself. And given all the failures of the reconstruction of Haiti, and of course people know that the problems of Haiti is not just about the earthquake. It goes far back beyond the natural disasters of the earthquake of 2010. And the fact that we have been able to identify one small corner of that country to help in some constructive way, and that we have now connections to that community. Even those of you who have not been there, at least met Pastor Johnny, and we very much felt that when we were there, we were shlichei mitzvah, which is the Hebrew term for we were emissaries of the mitzvah work that all of us at Adat Shalom have made possible. And we felt that responsibility and that privilege to be doing that work. Among the things that I haven't talked to you about is that there's a large Jewish component to the experience as well. I mean, every evening, as we sit and reflect on our day's experience, and people had different kinds of experiences we're able to share. And there was some moments that just, I'll share one last moment. If you want to know anything about pouring concrete now, you can give me a call, okay? I know more about it than I thought I ever would, okay? But there was when we pour the concrete to bore a foundation, there was a cement mixer, and one day they said we had to put both Team A and Team B on the same site at Lambie Village 2 because we were going to the far reaches of the foundation. And so we made a line with all 21 of us, essentially, taking a bucket from the cement mixer, and the young men were the ones who were doing the heavy work, shoveling gravel and cement and dirt into the cement mixer. And then the buckets, which are about this size, you pass along the line, and it was just a thing of beauty. You have to understand the picture in the mind that 21 people, from Montgomery County, white Jews, are passing buckets of cement, the length of like from here to the corner of the sanctuary, the back sanctuary, and the final person is handing it to a Haitian who dumps it into the trough, which begins to create the foundation. And we poured the first bucket of cement, and on the last day there, we actually poured the last bucket of cement to complete the foundation of home number 1. Now just imagine what that means to create the foundation, the yesod of home, which will house a Haitian. And side by side with us, there are young men working with us, young men in their 20s, who tell us a story that they're now living in a tent. There's one guy named Jude, who at one point I was sitting, I think it was with Steve or Michael, I forget who. I think it was Michael, yeah. Where's Michael? Michael and I were cutting rebar, which is the iron rods that you put into cement. Again, I know a lot more today than I did a week ago, right? We're cutting rebar, and Jude is with us. And he tells us that he is supporting 11 members of his family. He lives in a tent. And when we went to visit Lambie 2, we actually walked into his, you can't even call it a tent. It's a bunch of canvas tarps thrown over some wood poles. And there are 11 people in his family living there, and he's the only source of support. And he only works when a service mission comes down, which means about 10 to 11 times a year for probably 5 or 6 days. That's the only time he works, okay? And the amount of money he earns is about $12 a day. Is that right? No, $60. $60 a month, right? But so 5 days of work, so it's $12 a day or so. Okay. So when you're creating the foundation for that home, you have in your mind not just a hypothetical Haitian, but you're side by side with a Haitian who desperately needs that home, and to go into a home like that, which doesn't even have running water, by the way. They're still using outhouses, but it's a major step up from living in what is essentially a shack. So understand what it looks like to learn about what's Jewish about this work in that setting. Part of what makes me so proud of this work for our community and those of us who go down is that we are now walking the talk of prophetic Judaism. I've talked about this before and I've written about it, and that is, I think for so many of our young people, they've heard one too many sermons about Tikkun Olam, okay? Give Jews a way to do this work, and we're actually realizing what it is that our tradition has been teaching us to do for centuries. And there's no better way to get close to this work than this kind of experience. So I promised to tie this into the Parsha. But this is interesting, it's not hard. In this week's Parsha, Jacob gives a blessing to his grandsons, Joseph's sons, Ephraim and Manasseh. And what we know is he decides to cross his hands because Joseph positions his sons, Manasseh, on Jacob's right hand. Thank you. I just blanked for a second. And Ephraim on his left hand, thank you. And Ephraim on his left hand. And what happens is Jacob crosses his hands so as to give the right hand prayer, the primary blessing, to the younger of the two sons. So what's this about? You can't help but think about the following when you're in a place like Haiti in the developing world. You think about the tremendous gap between the industrialized developed world that we live in and more than half the population of the world that's living in the developed or the undeveloped or developing world, which has almost nothing, right? And you realize that a large part of that is simply the luck of the draw. It's fate, okay? It's just we happen to be born into this circumstance, and but for the grace of God go you or I. I mean, what if we were in that circumstance? And you realize that along with the privilege that we were born into, we didn't earn, okay? We were born into it because of where we were born. That along with that privilege comes responsibility. And seeing that face to face is really powerful. Now, the cross-hand switch by Jacob is an early suggestion that sequence of birth, which in the ancient world did determine priority and status, okay, that's not what had mattered. Jacob had a premonition that Ephraim would be a more important individual, make more contribution to the world than Manasseh, and he chose to give the blessing to Ephraim. Now, I don't want to talk about the generational dilemmas that raises, because Jacob also is the product of a double cross when he was a child, and maybe he's just passing that down. But in this case, what it suggests is that it's not just about who's born where. It suggests that actually we are all part of a common humanity, and if we can find a way to live that ethos, we're actually fulfilling the most important mandate that Judaism has taught us. And I think that's among the things that we feel we've been able to accomplish through this Haiti project. And I would hope that in years to come we'll continue to be doing this work, whether you do it by contributing to the Haiti Fund or decide to go down to a mission in the future. It's really hard to think of a way to more fulfill your humanity and your Judaism than to be engaged in this work. So Shabbat Shalom, and we'll invite the Torah readers to come up to the Bima.